Welcome to Death Over Dinner. You might be asking yourself, what could death and dinner possibly have in common? Or maybe you're wondering why someone would even want to talk about death, especially over an otherwise pleasant supper. Well, here's the deal. The way we die in America, and now in many other parts of the world, is pretty messed up. Not just the fact that we die. End-of-life care is far from ideal, and it causes a lot of bankruptcies. Most people die in hospitals, and they are really expensive. Yet, 75% of America says they want to die at home, and only 25% of us do. Regardless of where we spend our last weeks, days, or moments, the thing we are really missing is a straightforward conversation. It's obvious if you think about it. If you don't tell your loved ones what you want during your last mile, you won't get it. Say, for example, you wanted a vacation in Aruba, but you didn't tell anyone, and your well-meaning family booked you a long, costly ticket to Antarctica. Not what you wanted. The default when it comes to dying is also very expensive, and like Antarctica, most likely not what you wanted. Not telling your loved ones what you want only makes everything a lot harder for everyone, emotionally and logistically. They're already going to be devastated by losing you. On top of that, imagine having to make a seemingly endless list of decisions, and to make them immediately during your grief. So we came up with a simple solution: dinner and conversation. Just talking to each other, openly, directly, authentically. Since we launched, there have been over 100,000 dinners in 30 countries. It seems these two things go together quite nicely. So, what happens at a death dinner? It all begins with our website. You tell us why you're interested in having a dinner, and when you select an intention, we magically create a script for your evening. In this script, you will find a series of thoughtful questions for everyone who comes to dinner to consider and answer. If you don't like a particular question, don't answer it, and that's about it. But here are a few pointers. Don't surprise people. Pizza night, surprise, death dinner. No. Don't hog the talking stick. Put that phone away. No one needs you to be checking your Instagram while they are talking about how they want to be remembered. Make something simple. Light some candles. Create the right ambiance. Give yourself plenty of time. Make I statements. This is not an opportunity to argue. There are no experts in death. Listen deeply. Say something you're afraid to say. It is the quickest way to get closer to the people in your life. When you're done, maybe you want to take some next steps and put a few things in writing. Our goal is to change the way we die, one conversation at a time. Join us.
Well, please join me in giving Michael Hebb a warm welcome as he talks about his book, Let's Talk About Death Over Dinner.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming out.
So I'd like to talk about just breaking down the title of the book, because I think you put a bit of thought into it. First of all, why dinner?
Why dinner? Well, that's going to... Do you mind if I do a little tangential answer?
Yeah.
So my background is actually as a designer, and I studied architecture. And I started by... My interest in architecture wasn't so much because I was fascinated by buildings and the formal architecture and wanted to create something of great beauty, but I was really inspired by how to craft, how to design, how to shape human experience. And at the time, when I went to school 20 years ago, UX wasn't a thing that we talked about. If you were interested in creating human experience, architecture was one of the more obvious places to go. And so I became really interested in how you create buildings, gathering places that would really have a transformative effect on the people who came into these buildings. And so I spent a bit of time creating some guerrilla architecture, which we can go into if we want. I ended up, my first project, actually architecture firm that we created, a lot of the work we did was illegal. And we started a project called City Repair,
because we decided we want to repair the city, this being Portland, Oregon, in the way that we saw fit. Not necessarily the way that the city saw that it needed to be repaired. And so we started doing things, and again, we're going to maybe just put a pin in this and come back to it if there's interest around it. But we started intervening in the city in the ways that the city got really pissed off at, and that we were breaking the law. And through that, though, and a lot of these early interventions were about creating spaces for people to gather and connect. That was the main. If that was our focus of the UX. How do we get people to create space where they have an authentic connection, gathering, and experience? And so, eventually, after several years of iterating, I realized that architecture is it's a very costly, inefficient way to create experience. Obviously, code has become a much cheaper, more accessible way to create experience. It resides on very expensive, less and less so, devices. But nonetheless, it seemed very unwieldy to have to go and raise money or have a client that you happen to either be aligned with or not aligned with, who wants to create a thing so that somebody could have an experience in the physical space that would impact them emotionally, spiritually. And then I realized that the dinner table is readily available and readily underutilized. Most people don't know why they have a dinner table in their house. It's like, one of those almost leftover functionalities. Like, what is this? Is this for mail? Is it for my kids to do homework on? Because 20% of meals in the United States are eaten in the car. And now you add to that how many meals are eaten at the desk, how many meals are eaten on a couch in front of TV, or more likely, the larger number now is in bed with Netflix. And so you start to see that here is this thing, this object, that most of us have in some iteration or another, and it's not getting used. And it happens to be, in many ways, the first architecture. So if you think about if we go way back, shelter was a kind of almost a given. Like, we found ways to stay safe and have shelter. The fact that at some point we decided to create a space to share food and to share culture, and built this thing, whether it was low to the ground or at the height that we tend to use now, it's a pretty remarkable jump in the human experience. It also corresponds to some extent, with the fact that cooking is what, in fact, made us human. So Darwin got a lot of things right, as far as we know so far. He apparently didn't get the leap from the ape to man, the missing link, right. Richard Wrangham, who now runs, but he's one of the lead biologists and evolutionary biologists at Harvard, and he's kind of disproved Darwin's missing link argument, which was that we started to eat very large mammals. And so we started hunting for larger and larger mammals. We had a wealth of protein, and all of a sudden we made this transformation from ape to man. So what Wrangham has gone back through and proven to, as far as we know for now, it's actually the concentration of calories. So, which happens when you cook. So apes have big bellies, really big jaws, and small brains. And they chew 7 hours a day. We chew 24 minutes a day on average, right? And that's because we outsourced all of this huge belly, because if you're eating roots and hard to digest things, like a cow has 4 bellies, right? So apes have these big bellies, and then all of a sudden the innovation of cooking over fire to concentrate calories and make calories more readily digestible, a few things happen. The belly gets smaller. There's a bunch new energy, a new energy source that's available in the body. Where is that going to go? And then the jaw, because we're not chewing all the time, thins. So you have a natural situation where there's an opening. It's like available for rent kind of space shows up in our heads and it gets filled with much larger brains. And then you have the advent of language, in human language. I think that ape's probably a very sophisticated language. And all of this happens around the same time, most likely, that we're eating together at tables. And so for me, as a designer, I was like, well, I don't have to go and build something. I can use what's already there, again, like code. It's just sitting there. It's pretty much free. People have forgotten how to use it. And so I can start to use the table in really imaginative ways. And so that's kind of how the table side of it came into place. And I've been having dinners for the last 25 years around every topic imaginable.
So you had this idea of having the dinner around the table, bringing people together, getting them out of their beds from watching Netflix. And you decided the great way to do this is bring them on the cheery topic of death.
Right. Yeah,
why death? Yeah.
So I didn't start off with such a quote-unquote morbid centerpiece. At first, I was just interested in getting people back to the table and making it joyful. And I started a project in Portland called Family Supper with my then partner, Naomi Pomeroy, which at the time was considered the first pop-up restaurant supper club of this new generation of supper clubs. And so we started inviting people to our living room, turned our living room into a 21-foot table that I could put together quickly. And while still wearing my daughter and a baby Bjorn, which was really a big part of the design model of it, was like, what can we do and still have August in the carrier? And so the table had to be very easy to put together, made of hollow core doors. We invited people over. We didn't have any money, so we couldn't buy chairs. So the first dinner was, dinner is free, but you have to bring a chair and leave it. And then we were like, next one, we're going to have you bring plates and leave it. But then we realized the aesthetic part of my brain was like, I could deal with mismatched chairs, but I couldn't deal with mismatched china. And I was like, IKEA just opened up in Portland. Hold on to plates. So the first dinners were just joyful. And I got to see the incredible connection that was happening, and Portland was having a real moment. It's kind of the moment that led to the now Portlandia, that we all know and some love. But you had the Decemberists were just starting and having their first shows at some of these dinners, and Gus Van Sant would show up, and Miranda July was at the table, and this real incredible connection or collaboration coming together of brilliant thinkers in Portland at these dinners we were throwing. And that felt good for a little while. And then I got really inspired by the work of Gore Vidal, who was one of the great thinkers of the last 50 years. And he kind of challenged me to think about these dinners as being a modern symposium, in the sense going back to the dinners that Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and many of the leaders in classical period in Athens hosted, which on one hand looked like dinner parties, on the other hand they gave us the justice system and democracy, and a lot of the most powerful ideas we have came from these dinners within the classical period. And so the idea was, what can a dinner conversation do? How deep can it go? How much can it impact culture? So I kind of went from this idea of just inviting people back to the table to seeing how much impact can we have, and how far can you take the conversations? What terrain, what's off limits, what's taboo, what's really impactful? And so I started having really kind of disruptive or difficult conversations. Homelessness, wealth equity, bringing the 1% together to talk about wealth inequity. Had conversation, I did a dinner with the president of Rwanda and former president of Ireland, Mary Robinson, to talk about ending genocide. At the same time that Kagame, the president of Rwanda, was being labeled and called out as a genocidaire, as an agent of genocide himself. And I decided that we were just going to invite him to a dinner to talk about what it would look like ending genocide in our lifetime. What if there was no more genocide on this planet? How would we get there? Like maybe he's an expert, right? Like from what side, depends on, but let's just ask him. And so we did that with the Clinton Foundation. And it turned out that 3 years after the dinner, Mary Robinson and Kagame are working together now all of the time. She's the chancellor of the Great Lakes region of Eastern Africa. And so I got that, like, a dinner conversation, if it's potent enough and it's brave enough, can actually create a deep enough relationship. The beginning of their relationship happened at that dinner. And I don't know all of the in-between steps, but to see it many years later. So I kind of got that, like, an individual dinner can be, in itself, can change the shape of things. But I also learned that the more difficult the topic matter, the more vulnerable that it push people into the terrain, the more vulnerable the terrain, the more they got to know themselves at the table. Like, people surprise themselves. I saw it happen. And it's really, it's really lovely to be in the presence of someone surprising themselves, right? It's one thing when people are just repeating that ongoing loop of things, like, that when you're about to go on a date or like see a friend and you're like, I'm going to tell them about this, and then I'm going to tell them about this, and you're kind of rehearsing what you're going to say, and then you say it and it doesn't really feel that good. You're like, no, I didn't really have like a real experience. I started to get interested in dinners and topics where people were like, I just said that. Like, I've never said that before. Or their spouse would be like, I've never heard. We've been together for 30 years and you've never told me this thing. So that was the area. I started to see that the table is really good at that space of getting to know ourselves, connecting people, and where we surprise ourselves as well. And death ended up being the strongest medicine, this thing that we avoid so much in our culture for so many reasons, some of them very silly. But the fact that we have avoided this topic, bringing it back to people and giving it kind of like a gift, not a challenge or not something dark, but like it's a gift to actually talk about this. I saw so much. Those were the most powerful dinners I've ever done. And then I wanted to create them a platform, a digital platform where everybody could have that experience, not just this rarefied group of individuals.
So you talked about how people have these moments where they surprise themselves.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about how that happens with where they talk about death over dinner?
Yeah, sure. So we used to get reminded about death all the time. For one, people would die younger. They would die more unexpectedly. We would see we would see dead bodies. We would see people dying. We hadn't over-medicalized death. Our rituals around death and dying were more confronting. Now that you almost never see a body. And it feels almost a sterilized ritual around, what am I at a funeral? I couldn't tell. So there's a lot of things that have taken this conversation of death, or this this engagement with our mortality out of our purview. And religion likes to use memento mori as well, have us come into terms with our mortality. And religion doesn't play as much of a role in people's lives anymore. So for the whole of our existence, we've been in an ongoing confrontation with our mortality. And now we've medicalized and sterilized and distanced ourselves from this fact. In fact, a lot of people are fascinated, especially in the tech space, in this idea of curing or defeating death, which is fine. That's not a value statement, but it's just like a sign of the times that we're not confronting it. And so there's such tremendous opportunity. When you bring this thing that we all share, this thing that really touches one of the most beautiful places in us, because when you talk about the fact that you're mortal, that it eventually will end, it's not that needs to be dark or scary. That also just will very quickly put into perspective what's most valuable to you, right? What your priorities are. Okay, so it's going to end. What do I want to do while I'm here, right? Am I operating with some hidden bias? We all have biases. We all have hidden biases and invisible biases. Most of us have biases around the fact that we're going to die. So am I operating with a hidden bias that doesn't have me deeply appreciate the limited resource that life is? How important the relationships are? How, it's kind of grossly animated by a bucket list. And which is great, but like, why not every day? And so when you see people together delving into these canyons that we've determined are dark, but in fact are filled with vitality, you see them see parts of themselves they don't get access to all the time, and that's why we educate ourselves. We educate ourselves because we get in touch with parts of ourselves that we didn't have access to before we were educated, or we didn't have access to experiences. So this kind of enrichment, there's incredible information about life and yourself in the terrain that is called death and end of life. Whether you've been given permission or a good invitation, or somebody's led you through that in a way that's exciting to you, most likely not in our culture. So.
Yeah. We're going to go on with questions, but if you have any questions, just come to the microphone. As y'all come up, I'll start calling y'all in to join in the conversation. But real quickly, I'll bounce off a topic you just touched on. You were saying about how the conversation about death can lead to, in a way, clarifying your life somewhat. What are some questions that you had that relate to that?
Some questions that I had.
Or some questions that you have that people can talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what happens at a death dinner is people are very curious. They want to have a preview of it before they jump in for that swim. I think that the book actually gives you a pretty good experience without having to be at a dinner. But one such question that is more kind of deep end of the pool is, I ask people frequently at these dinners, let's imagine that you only have 30 days left to live. What is your immediate emotion, right? Like, you can't change the prognosis, you can't change the fact that you're going to die in 30 days. Are you angry? Are you strangely peaceful? Are you nervous? Are you anxious? And then how are you going to spend the next 30 days, right? What are you going to do? Are you the type of person that's like, I'm going to go to the 7 wonders of the world because, or some people, I'm going to do precisely what I'm already doing, right? Every day I wouldn't change a thing. Or I'm going to write letters to my children or my future, my grandchildren or whatever, or for posterity. Maybe you think that everybody wants to have letters from you. What are the things that you value when you think that you have such a limited time, right? What does your last day look like? What does your last hour look like? Who's around you? How are you feeling? Right? There's not a lot of people asking you this question in modern life that we're living. And when you see someone go through those emotions and encounter and confront this, this kind of like quote unquote Grim Reaper, you really get down to the core of them. You can't really hide from that question. People will, if they don't want to answer, they don't. But I've actually never had a situation where someone doesn't want to freely walk into that space and get to know themselves. So that they'll walk away and be like, I need to have children. I didn't think that I was going to have children, and I had this death dinner, and now I know I need to have children. Or I never thought that I could take care of even a dog, but now I'm going to get a dog. Or, I need to. One of the other questions is, you're in the major earthquake. You know you're not going to make it out. If you had one phone call to make, if you had this little window, you had one phone call. Is it an apology? Is it a regret? Is there something who would you call if you had one call left, and what would you say? And why haven't you said it yet? Right? There's a lot, we could spend a couple hours psychologically just unpacking that basic question, but, and your therapist probably isn't going to ask you this, right? You know, it'd be a little bit intense if you lay down on your therapist's couch and they're like, start asking the questions that I ask. You might not see that therapist again. But we've created the blamable third party. Like, imagine if your therapist also wanted you to play Cards Against Humanity. You'd be like, like you should have your license pulled. So there's this thing where if we create a death dinner and it becomes this trend like a board game and it's fun and you can step in to it and you can blame us. I don't know, the script's right here. Cards Against Humanity has this crazy, wants me to say this thing aloud. I guess I will, right? So we become a blamable third party so that you can have a deep experience and connect with the people in your life. And there's a bunch of practical reasons why you want to know these things about yourself. You want to know them about your loved ones. You want them to know what you want, because if they don't know it, it's not going to happen. So
we have a question.
Yeah, of course.
Why do you think, or what do you think caused the underutilization of the dinner table over time?
The what? The
underutilization of
the
the dinner
underutilization
table?
Of the dinner table, yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of things, led to us not knowing how to eat together. The glorification of mass-produced and industrialized food, the science of food, how exciting it was to move from the albatross, to being almost like a beast of burden that had to cook, right? Like that was a lowly thing that you would go have to grow your own food and then have to cook it. Like this miraculous thing that it's in a, in a can, like in some sort of plastic packaging that, in fact, will kill us. We found, so like the fact that we glorified convenience and technology without thinking about what actually makes us what makes us human, what gives us joy. That we, if we're connected to where our food is grown, we have much more gratitude. We're also getting much higher nutrients, especially if we're building soil. And then if we're learning how to prepare that food, the fact is the food is going to have much more nutrient value because somebody you love is cooking it for somebody else you love. More likely that you're going to sit down and share that food over a conversation because somebody's invested time and energy. Whereas if I just pick up Uber Eats and order something, it doesn't really feel like an insult to sit down with, the next episode of Narcos or whatever, which I'm totally down with. Like I did that last night. But there's something, we're living in a culture where I believe that antidepressants are the most prescribed pill in the United States. So why? Why are we depressed? We're looking for meaning. Where can we inject more meaning or lean in towards more meaning or create more meaning in our lives? One thing for sure is knowing where our food comes from, having a meaningful relationship to how it's grown and how we prepare it and how we serve it, and then connecting with other humans in our lives over it has worked for a long time for mankind, for humankind. So I think that there's it's a little bit like the opposite of, I don't know, what's the inverse of an exponential? Logarithmic? Okay, see. I'm glad I'm here. So there's like a logarithmic relationship to forgetting these type of skills, right? And they're really hard. It'd be hard to have them grow once again because a few generations in of not knowing the importance of sitting at a table together or cooking our food together or having meaningful conversations over that table, it's almost completely gone. It becomes a relic. So.
Yeah. I think we have another question.
Yeah, of course.
So if I want to talk about death over dinner, who should I invite to the dinner?
Yeah, so...
And will I get...
Oh, yeah.
Have you noticed different responses, say if I'm with some of my friends versus my family, parents, children, spouse? Are there different themes that come up or what have you noticed?
Yeah, so who should you invite to dinner? Well, in the video you saw that the idea is you don't surprise people. There's a great process of self-selection around this conversation and these dinners. Some people aren't ready. You know, you might be like, I try to talk to my spouse and he says no. My parents absolutely are not into it, or you know, my friends seem like they're more willing, so let me start there, right? The thing is, you will have a completely different conversation with your friends than you will with your spouse, than you will with your parents, than you will with your kids if you have them. And each one of them are valuable for different reasons. Your friends is really about, you know, getting to know each other better and connecting with your friends. Like you'll get a profound connection with whoever you sit down at this table with. I've seen complete strangers become lifelong friends, like, you know, in 3 hours because the topic is so unusual. So the other thing to know about when you're inviting somebody and it seems like they're not interested in having this conversation. You're in this room, you have some interest in this conversation, but maybe the people around you in your life don't have as much interest, and it seems like they don't want to talk to you about it if you've tried, right? So the thing about this conversation is we're not good at rejection. Sometimes I say if we were as good at, how does it go? If we looked at it like courtship and getting a job, right? And we treated like death conversation the same as we treat those things, we would never find love and we'd never get a job, because like those things take all our creativity and tenacity to have happen. You're in this room because you're tenacious, because you're on this campus, you got a job at Google, because you probably had a bunch of rejections along the way to get here, and you've just persevered, right? Now, if you want to know how the people in your life want to be remembered, they want have to happen to their body, all of these things, what they want their last days to look like, you can find it out. It's just the trick is not, and it's not about them, right? They won't talk, because everybody who's alive is having a conversation in their head about the fact that they're going to die. Everybody knows it, like they got the press release, right? They're like completely clear. Now there might be certain layers of denial, or they don't want to talk to you about it, right? So instead of being like, they don't want to talk about it, no, they don't want to talk to me about it. So how do I have to shift my way of being so that the people in my life want to talk to me about this thing that's so important to them, right? And so it shifts from this blaming mentality that we usually have, people have around parents especially. I get it, they're triggering. Or spouses, I get it, also triggering. But like, they do have a conversation, how do you get invited into it? And so, yeah, I mean, if you want to try out a dinner, send an invite out to 20 friends. You'll probably get like 5 or so that'll bite, right? Maybe you'll get none, and maybe you'll be like, I need new friends. I'm sure they're fine. But you know, the other thing is just go gently. The culture is changing around this topic. There's a lot of people doing amazing work. And so the literacy level about end of life and dying is literally rising up every day. Like the system is getting more and more intelligent and connected and acceptable. When we started this 7 years ago, there were no articles about death and dying. Like once a month there might be a minor piece. If we did a search right now about death and dying, and then looked at it, you guys could do this pretty easily, looked at it historically about the amount of just pure media and the amount of front page news all across the world right now, like it is we have a sea change, and there's a lot of people doing incredible work. So you're inviting people into the conversation, you're inviting them into a higher and higher literacy rate. And so that's why I do this work, is to increase the literacy. Literacy increases empowerment. When people feel empowered, they make decisions that more are aligned with their true selves. People are happier, the world's happier, environment's better, like all of these things. So that's kind of how I break it down.
So we mentioned relatives and friends, but does it even have to be with people you know? I mean, I guess you have to know them well enough to invite them, but...
Yeah, no, I think that, I mean, you guys could do death over dinner or death over lunch here quite easily. There's a lot of corporations that do, actually. And but, you know, the fact is you will know the people you sit down with. You will feel connected to them. When we created deathoverdinner.org, the platform, I knew I didn't have the bandwidth to manage a community. As you sure well know, like the amount of resource to properly manage a community and serve them is tremendous, especially in digital where it can just scale. And so when we created Death Over Dinner, and we built it for $11,000 that we raised from an Indiegogo campaign. And for 5 years, that was the only funding we had. So $11,000, Civilization, this incredible design firm in Seattle, who just won like the Cooper Hewitt Award for design agency of the year. They pitched in a bunch of free time. We built this thing together. It ran with a $0 annual budget for 5 years. They're at a conservative count. There's been this video is old now, 200,000 dinners. This means like 1 million people have sat down and had this conversation for literally $11,000. You think about 1 million people having a 2 to 3 hour experience, right? Like, so it worked. This idea meeting its time, but we realized that we didn't have the resources to engage a community and say, here's a dinner happening. It was all like, hey, if you want to do a dinner, just like a board game, here it is, it's on you, make it happen. So that was our model, really, just because of the lack of resources.
Yeah, so you talk about lack of resources. In other cases, I think I've heard you refer to the website and its presentation as a gift. And why is that important to you, that it's like a gift?
Yeah, I mean, there's been lots of opportunities to transactionalize it. Mm-hmm. People are like, well, we're going to sell tickets. What can we do? Sell tickets, or insurance companies? Like, do you want to partner with us? And, what a great way to sell some life insurance. Like, sure. No. The thing about transactions is that they don't necessarily, by their design, bring people closer together. That's not the nature of a transaction. Transaction intentionally creates a little bit of a boundary. You know what you're getting for it. Somebody knows what they're giving you. That's great and clear. Gifts are messier. They're more human. Gifts are intended to bring people, to obligate people in some way. Warring tribes would give each other gifts as this way of kind of obligation. Gifts stay in some level of circulation. It's kind of just their DNA. Like there's a DNA of a gift and there's a DNA of a transaction. Lewis Hyde writes about this really brilliantly, and he was one of the people who inspired Lessig and the open source. Lawrence Lessig started. What is it? No, but he is involved in that as well. I was thinking of the Commons. Creative Commons, yeah. Inspired in great part by Lewis Hyde's work around kind of the DNA of transaction versus gift. And I really wanted it to be really clear that no one was enriching themselves, that people were actually doing the opposite of enriching themselves, that they felt so passionately about this that they were going to risk their good name. When I first came up with the idea and called a bunch of friends in the healthcare space, they're like, no. You're crazy, it's not going to work, everyone's going to think you're insane, you can't. Death and dinner, and now we're partnering with the Cleveland Clinic, which is one of the most reputable healthcare systems in the world, and they were building the medical edition with the Cleveland Clinic and probably 1,000 medical partners. And I'm lecturing at Sloan Kettering and partnering with Sloan Kettering, so we've, in about a month, we've entered into the oncology space, the terminal illness space, which would not let you into this conversation. Death and cancer, they're just not in the same room. We're going to beat cancer, right? And I was like, well, the elephant's in the room. People who have a stage 4 terminal diagnosis, they are thinking about the fact that they might die. Let's give them the opportunity to talk about it. And I got a big no for many years, and now I'm getting what a great idea. Where have you been our whole lives? It's like, okay, yes, it's changing, but but for me to be able to get access to work with the Cleveland Clinic and Sloan Kettering, that it had to be a gift. If I was an entrepreneur who had this idea, we wouldn't be sitting here, and there wouldn't be a book.
Yeah. You talked about sending that email to 20 of your friends. I think at one point you had this time when you sent out email to a lot of your friends. Yeah. It resulted in you attending your own funeral, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that? How did it happen?
Yeah, careful what you ask for. So I had just broken up with the love of my life. That's so I thought. I was really depressed, and I was about to turn 40. And the first thing I thought was, I'm going to be alone on my 40th birthday, and here's this like great reckoning, and I'm going to think about what a failure I am as, romantically, and I'm going to be alone. And so I sent out an email to about 50 friends saying, hey, in 2 months, I'm turning 40. I don't know where we're going to be, but we're going to be somewhere on the northern coast of California. Save the date. Tell me if you can come now. I need to know. And I got 40 yeses, like, well, I'll be there, immediately. I was like, phew. I'm not going to be alone on my 40th. And then about a week later, a friend, because now there's this like list with all of these people on it, even though I was like, don't reply all, breaks that rule and says, hey, so, Mr. Death's turning 40. Let's go ahead and celebrate his great turn by throwing him a living funeral. Right, and at that point, that's like somebody has called out an amazing challenge to me in front of everybody, and I can't be like, that's a terrible idea. I actually was brokenhearted. That's why I'm doing this, and now I have to die. And so I was like, great, yes, yeah, of course, we'll do it. And it got really serious. Like it really built up steam as it got closer, and it be turned into the centerpiece of this long weekend. And a whole day dedicated to preparations. I ended up being like ritually bathed, anointed with oils, dressed in white, brought downstairs with my eyes closed. I was blindfolded. Downstairs into this courtyard, and before I know it, I'm being helped into what I then realized, just by texture and smell, was my own coffin. And then picked up by pallbearers whose breath smelled like whiskey. And which really it's funny, the little details, like the whiskey on their breath. I was like, I'm definitely at my own funeral / Irish wake. And they're drinking because they're having a really hard time, right? They're not drinking because they're day drinkers. They're drinking because they're dealing with what looks like one of their best friend's bodies in a coffin, and the whole thing makes them incredibly uncomfortable. And so I get lifted into this darkened room. It has one candle, and there's 40 people in it. And a friend of mine, who I didn't know who it was at the time because I couldn't recognize by her wailing, starts losing it in the way that you might pay somebody to cry at your funeral, right? Kerners, which is still a thing all over the world. You can pay someone to cry. And what it helps is other people have the emotion. But I wasn't paying her, and she couldn't control it. And there's this incredible woman, Alex, who just started wailing, sobbing uncontrollably. And then it was very clear that this was not a joke, right? Anybody who was still kind of tongue-in-cheek, there might have been some people there that had ingested some psilocybin, but that probably just made it that even more intense for them. I wasn't ingesting psilocybin that day, just so we're clear. So I'm laying in this coffin, and for 3 hours, my friends, air their grievances, real grievances, as if I were dead. I was like, I could hear you. Really where I had failed them. But then the harder part was where they loved me, right? I got to hear this, and it couldn't do anything about it. 40 people that mean the most to you in your life, feeling like they can tell you in an unabashed way how they feel about you, without you being able to deflect it, without you being able to acknowledge them, nothing. I couldn't take it. And it made me really uncomfortable. And my 15-year-old daughter was there, like, and she got up on the edge of my coffin and started talking to me. I mean, you want to have an emotional experience? Have your 15-year-old daughter attend your own funeral while you're awake. And so ultimately, my takeaways from it, and so we created this whole site, The Living Wake, so that people, again, can have a blamable resource to throw these things. Because a lot of people, when they're 80 or 90, or they just want to play Tom Sawyer, want to have these experiences, but they don't want to be the person that, you know, comes up with the idea and organizes it. So livewake.com we produced just for, you know, again, a gift. But what I realized was from that experience is I don't know how to receive love. I got really good at giving it. And then I also, in research about how we die, there's an incredible book called How We Die, and learned that the heart is actually, it's essentially two muscles and a timer. It's two distinct organs. One of those organs receives blood. That's what it does all day, receiving blood, oxygenating it. And then the other half of our heart distributes blood. That's all it does. It just pumps blood all day. And then the timer, so you got pump, 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 right? You got give, receive, give, receive, give, receive, give. And a heart attack, which is still the #1 killer in the world, is an imbalance between give and receive. It's an imbalance in that heart. It's timing, the timing is off. And I was like, okay, so if I don't figure out this side of my heart, this receiving, then I'm like reducing my lifespan, reducing how much I can actually give if I don't learn how to receive. And I'm gonna die sooner. And so I kind of got this, I got it really hard that I needed to learn how to slow down and receive. So, pretty good lesson.
You have a ritual that you begin these things with and a ritual that you end them with as well. At the end, I think you have a ritual that everybody says something that they really appreciate, but the person to the side of them. And so I guess we'll end and I'll say something that I appreciate about you. Thank you so much for coming here to talk to us, and thank you for covering this important topic, spending the time to think about important questions that can help us learn more about life. You have a quote in the book from Kyoko Mori that says, everything we say about life, death, is actually about life. And I feel like that. I feel like the questions you have in here really help us to think about our life and think about what's important. And thank you very much for coming here today.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here.